There's a face behind the mask. Beautiful, alluring, but not entirely what it seems. Some men fall for her charm, not realizing they're stepping into a psychological labyrinth. The danger isn't in the woman herself, but in what she awakens in the unconscious male psyche. We're not talking about ordinary attraction, we're talking about archetypes, projections, and the shadow forces they unleash. Tonight, we dive into a truth most men sense, but few ever confront. There exists in every man's unconscious a figure not entirely of his choosing, a woman he meets not in the streets, but in his dreams, his fantasies, his deepest emotional entanglements. She is captivating, magnetic, almost divine. But she is not what she seems. This woman, this presence, is an archetype, ancient, powerful, and born not of the woman before you, but from the shadows within you. Some women in life unknowingly embody her. They don't wear black capes or cast spells. No, they smile sweetly, they laugh softly, they love intensely, and yet they awaken something primordial inside the man, a pull, a spell, and very often a destruction. She is what I call the Shadow Queen. The Shadow Queen is not evil, but she is dangerous. She represents the parts of the feminine that have been denied, repressed, or left unexplored by the conscious male psyche. She doesn't seduce with body alone. She seduces with mystery, with chaos, with power, and when a man falls under her influence, he often believes he's found love. In truth, he's projected his own hidden desires and hidden fears onto her. Think about it. That woman who seemed too good to be true, the one you placed on a pedestal, the one whose rejection nearly shattered your identity, was it really her that hurt you? Or was it the collapse of the illusion you created? Men are drawn to the Shadow Queen because she reflects what they haven't owned in themselves. Power, sensuality, emotional depth. But when these qualities come cloaked in the unknown, they become terrifying. And when a man has not made peace with his own shadow, he will meet it in her, and it will consume him. This is not about blame, this is about awareness. Because until a man recognizes the archetype, until he sees the Shadow Queen not as her, but as his own projection, he remains trapped, chasing what he thinks is love, but is really just a mirror. And here's the most unnerving part. Some women, not all, but some, have learned to wield this archetype, consciously or unconsciously. They know how to tap into a man's unmet longings. They reflect exactly what he wants to see, and then they take what they need. When it's over, the man is left wondering, what just happened? But that's only one part of the puzzle. Because what happens when this archetype doesn't just seduce, but controls the very lens through which a man views all women? What if the next woman you meet is not her at all, and yet you still see the Shadow Queen? We'll explore that in a moment. Every man carries within him an inner woman, not one of flesh and blood, but of symbol, of dream, of deep unconscious imagery. She does not age, she does not speak in words, but she shapes how a man sees every woman he meets. She is his inner feminine, the Anima, and she holds immense power. When a man is unconscious of her presence, she doesn't just whisper, she directs. She tells him who to love, who to long for, who to obsess over. And in this blindness, many men fall not in love, but into a projection. What they think is connection is actually illusion. You see a woman walk into the room. She's beautiful, yes, but why can't you stop looking? Why does your chest tighten? Why do you feel as though you've known her before? In dreams, in memories you can't quite place. That's not her. That's your anima, reaching through her image. The anima doesn't care if she's a stranger. She speaks through emotional intensity, through longing, through fantasy. She says, "This is the one." But is she? Or is she just the surface your unconscious chose to project onto? This is the trap. When a man falls in love with his own projection, he loses the ability to see the woman as she truly is. He doesn't hear her words. He hears his own desires echoed back. He doesn't see her flaws. He sees his longing for wholeness, perfection, meaning. And when she inevitably fails to live up to the fantasy, it's not disappointment, it's devastation. The anima is not malicious. She is a guide, a bridge between the conscious and unconscious. But if left unchecked, she becomes a siren, leading men not to love, but to collapse. He thinks she betrayed him. But what really shattered was the illusion. Now here's the haunting question. If the anima can deceive a man into false love, what else can she do? What happens when she doesn't just shape desire, but also fear? When she paints all women with the same emotional brush? Some men fall in love again and again, only to be burned each time, never realizing it's not the women they fear, it's the part of themselves they refuse to face. But there's a darker twist to this inner drama. What if, at some point, the anima turns on the man himself? What if she becomes not a lover, but an enemy? That is what we uncover next. There's a strange thing that happens when a man meets a woman who touches something deep inside him. Not joy, not love, but pain. And yet he feels drawn to her, magnetized, obsessed. It's as if the very thing that hurts also attracts. Why? Because some women, whether they realize it or not, become mirrors of a man's unresolved wound. The pain he carries from childhood, the trauma he never named, the rejection he buried beneath pride. It lives on, and one day it shows up, not as memory, but as her. She arrives with intensity. Maybe she's emotionally distant. Maybe she's unpredictable. Maybe she sees through him, and it terrifies him. But something in him recognizes her, not because she is the source of the pain, but because she resembles it. This is the seductive wound. We don't always fall for what is good for us. We often fall for what is familiar. If love once felt like confusion, if affection was tied to abandonment, then the psyche seeks the same pattern, hoping irrationally to finally solve it. And here lies the tragedy. The man doesn't know he's reenacting his own past. He thinks he's choosing a woman, but really, he's choosing his own suffering, dressed in a different face. Some women reflect this back, not by intention, but by archetype. They carry an energy that awakens the deepest insecurities in a man. The fear of not being enough, the fear of being left, the fear of losing control. And yet, he can't walk away, because walking away would mean facing the pain alone, and many would rather suffer with her than confront themselves. But can you truly love someone if you're using them to fight a war within yourself? What happens when the very thing you desire is also the thing that destroys you? This is not just romance, it's mythology. It's repetition compulsion. It's the psyche pulling old wounds into new lovers, hoping for healing but often finding deeper despair. And now the deeper question emerges. What if the women who wound you aren't just reflecting your past? What if they're testing you, testing your ability to confront the parts of yourself you still refuse to face? Because some feminine energies don't wound to destroy, they wound to awaken. And the next phase of this archetype? She doesn't just reflect your pain, she controls it. And that is what we'll confront next. Beauty has always held power, but the most dangerous kind of power is the kind that hides beneath the surface. You don't see it coming, you admire it, you desire it, and before you realize what's happened, you're entangled. Some women, not all, but some, carry an energy that operates far beneath logic, beneath words, beneath appearances. They don't need to speak to dominate a room. Their very presence rearranges the emotional landscape. And if a man is unconscious of his own inner dynamics, he will not recognize what's happening. He will mistake intensity for connection and control for love. This is not about manipulation in the ordinary sense. This is archetypal. It's the dark current of the unconscious feminine, seductive, fluid, and at times, ruthless. She doesn't take power forcefully, she draws it from you. Through silence, through allure, through the illusion that you are in control, when in truth, you are being led. Have you ever found yourself unable to say no, speaking words you didn't plan to say, feeling guilt where no wrong was done? That's not logic. That's not rational behavior. That's possession. Not by the woman herself, but by the psychological dynamic she awakens in you, the longing to please, the need to prove, the craving to be chosen. This is how the unconscious feminine asserts power, not through dominance, but through influence, through evoking your inner boy, the part of you still chasing the approval he never received, the part that says, if I just love her enough, she'll finally see me. But here's the truth. The more you give, the less you feel yourself. Because what you're surrendering is not just attention or time, it's identity. And when your sense of self begins to dissolve into her emotional world, you are no longer in a relationship. You are in a trance, one where your own boundaries no longer hold. And the scariest part? You might like it. Because surrender can feel like devotion until you realize you've disappeared. Now the question becomes, if the feminine can pull a man into her shadow through desire and guilt, what happens when that same energy becomes hostile? What if she doesn't just reflect your pain? What if she begins to weaponize it? We'll step into that darker territory next. There's a kind of battle that leaves no bruises, no visible wounds, and yet it cuts deeper than any blade. You don't even know you're in a war until you're already losing, and by then your mind is no longer your own. Some feminine energies, again not all but some, have learned how to use emotion as a weapon. Not shouting, not threats, but something far more effective. Vulnerability. And here lies the paradox. What appears as softness can be a form of control. Tears that don't ask for comfort, but demand compliance. Silence that doesn't seek space, but instills fear. A look, a sigh, a sudden withdrawal of affection, and suddenly the man feels guilty, confused, even ashamed, though he can't explain why. This is not cruelty. It's archetypal. It comes from deep layers of unconscious behavior where manipulation doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like survival. But to the man who has not yet faced his shadow, it becomes psychological warfare. He begins to doubt his intentions. He rewrites his own reality to match hers. Maybe I was too harsh, he says. Maybe I didn't listen enough. And over time, the ground beneath him begins to shift. He loses confidence, clarity, even his voice, until the only truth that remains is hers. This isn't love. It's possession by the archetype of the wounded feminine turned weaponized. It is when sensitivity becomes a tool to dominate, when emotions don't just seek empathy, they command obedience. And what makes it so effective is that it's invisible. You can't fight what you can't see. You can't win a war you don't know you're in, because every time he stands up for himself, he feels like he's hurting her. Every time he pulls away, he feels like a monster. And so, he stays, he apologizes, he sacrifices, and he slowly disappears. Now you might ask, why would a man tolerate such a dynamic? Because deep down he doesn't believe he deserves peace. And that belief is not hers, it's his. Planted long ago by something or someone else. But here's the twist. What if the emotional chaos isn't random? What if it's designed to keep you unstable, distracted, dependent? And what if, just what if, the next stage isn't emotional warfare anymore, but energetic extraction? Let's go even deeper. Next, there are encounters in life that leave you inspired, expanded, energized. But then, there are others, far more subtle, that leave you feeling empty. Not right away, not all at once, but little by little, day by day, you feel your fire dim. Your thoughts get heavier, your purpose starts to blur, and you wonder, what happened to me? This is not about noise, it's not about drama, it's about energy. Some feminine archetypes don't demand attention, they pull it. They don't ask for your life force, they consume it quietly without ever announcing themselves. A man can enter this dynamic willingly, believing he's being supportive, loving, even noble. But over time he becomes more of a container than a partner. He listens endlessly, but no one listens back. He gives and gives, but nothing comes in return. He offers his strength, and somehow ends up feeling weaker for it. This is the energetic drain, the unconscious feminine that feeds not on love, but on need. A kind of parasitic bond begins to form, where the man becomes the source of emotional regulation, validation, even identity. He is not loved for who he is used for what he provides: attention, security, presence. And yet, he often doesn't leave. Why? Because it's not just about her power over him, it's about his inability to separate. Something in him feels needed, and being needed makes him feel valuable. But this is not connection. This is codependency disguised as purpose. In truth, she doesn't want the man. She wants what he carries, his focus, his certainty, his masculine vitality. Not to nurture it, but to absorb it. And the more he gives, the more she requires. It becomes a cycle, a loop, where the man keeps trying to fix something that was never his to fix. And the longer he stays, the more disconnected he becomes. From himself, from his work, from his own inner light. He begins to forget what it feels like to be whole. But here's the haunting part. This isn't just about one woman. This is an archetype, a pattern. And if a man doesn't face it in one relationship, it will appear again, in a new face, a new voice, a new body, but always the same hunger behind the eyes. Now the question grows darker. What happens when the man finally pulls away? Does the feminine energy let go, or does she transform into something far more dangerous? What comes next is not just possession, it's destruction masked as devotion, and that is where we're headed. There comes a moment in the psyche, quiet, almost invisible, when what once felt like love turns into something far more dangerous. Not rage, not betrayal, but devotion. The kind of devotion that consumes. You see, there are women, not consciously malicious, but archetypally powerful, who do not destroy a man with fire, but with attachment. She clings, not with chains, but with emotion, with tears, with stories of how he's her everything, her only anchor, her only light. And at first it feels beautiful. Who doesn't want to be seen as irreplaceable? Who doesn't want to matter deeply? But this is where the collapse begins. Because love, when mixed with emotional dependency, becomes a slow poison. The man begins to carry not only her needs, but her identity. He becomes the filter through which she sees herself. Her mood depends on his behavior. Her peace depends on his presence. Her existence depends on his existence. And so, he stops living for himself. He doesn't speak freely because it might upset her. He doesn't follow his passions because it might leave her behind. He doesn't say no because he knows what happens next. The spiral, the silence, the withdrawal, the emotional breakdown. And so he adapts, he bends, he compromises, until he forgets who he is. This isn't partnership, this is fusion. And fusion is not intimacy, it's obliteration. There is no space between self and other, no boundary, no breath. What was once love becomes suffocation. But here's the deeper tragedy. She believes she's being loving. She believes her intensity is proof of loyalty. She has no idea that her devotion is crushing the very man she clings to. And he says nothing, because leaving would break her, and staying is breaking him. This is the quiet collapse, when a man disappears, not with a scream, but with a shrug, numb, hollow, absent from himself, a ghost in his own life. And still, he stays. But here's the final test. What happens when he tries to reclaim himself? When the man begins to wake up, reclaim his space, take back his mind? Does she surrender? Or does she turn into something else entirely? Something the ancient psyche always feared, the devouring mother. And that is where we go next. There's an ancient archetype, older than memory, older than myth, the figure of the devouring mother, not a literal mother, but a feminine force that does not nurture, it consumes. It cloaks itself in care, in sacrifice, in concern, but beneath the surface it operates through control, fear, and guilt. To the untrained eye, it looks like love, a woman who just wants the best for him, who's only worried, who says, "I'm doing this because I care." But care becomes a cage. She smothers under the guise of safety. She protects, but not to empower. To possess, her love is conditional, her support is transactional. And every time he tries to grow, to expand, to separate, she pulls him back, with tears, with illness, with silent suffering. He doesn't rebel, he shrinks. Why? Because the devouring force doesn't attack the man's body, it feasts on his identity. It tells him, "Without me you are nothing. Without me you'll fall apart. Without me you'll be unloved." And he believes it. He begins to fear independence. He becomes ashamed of ambition. He self-sabotages his own rise because some deep part of him has been trained to equate freedom with abandonment. And this is how the cycle continues. Not through domination, but dependency. Not through force, but through emotional enmeshment. The woman becomes the center of his world, not in joy, not in intimacy, but in obligation. A role he never agreed to, but cannot escape. And, here's the most haunting part, she doesn't know she's doing it. The devouring force often believes it is loving, but love, in its highest form, liberates. It doesn't hold, it doesn't guilt, it doesn't bind. So what's the way out? The man must awaken the inner father, the archetype that draws boundaries, that protects the self, that says enough. He must reclaim his voice, his space, his sovereignty, not with anger, but with clarity. And when he does, he doesn't just escape her grip. He transcends the entire pattern, because in the end, this isn't about women. It's about consciousness, about waking up to the hidden forces we've allowed to rule us and reclaiming the parts of ourselves we gave away in the name of love. Not to fight the feminine, but to finally meet it whole. The war ends not when we win, but when we remember who we are and refuse to forget again.